From the 6++ studio that is my room, I'm Edward Fawcett. This week, I'm bringing you an update on week 2 of the Square-based online tournament in the format of a made-up weather report of a place that doesn't exist. Hold on for more. As you can see this week, the weather has become a lot more extreme. Last time we had some cloudy but sunny weather. This time we've got some real storms, but also some sunny periods around the top edges and middle of the map. Turns out if the weather is not representative of actual weather patterns, you can kind of just do what you want. First up, we have got the Beastman, and now I don't want to be dramatic, but the wheels have come off the chariots. Not a single win this week from any of the Beastman player, which is unfortunate. 2 losses and a draw, so a real rough week. But only 3 players, small sample size. Doesn't mean anything. Hopefully have a bit more luck coming into week 3. Speaking of having a little bit more luck, Bretonians recover from their disastrous first week, and they have got 6 wins from the 11 players, which is a much better place to be in. 55% win rate. The Armies of Infamy went 2-2, and they've also got the second highest scoring player across the entire event up until this point. Admittedly, there is a 3-way tie, but, Bretonians looking pretty solid. Looking like they've bounced back nicely from week number 1. Speaking of doing what nicely after week number 1, last week, Chaos Dwarves weren't looking so hot. They had 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw. Well, now there is a 4th Chaos Dwarf player, and they've got 2 wins and 2 draws, which is not too shabby at all. That is an undefeated week for the Chaos Dwarves. Still only a 50% win rate, and it only puts them up to about 36-37% overall, but looking good. Staying up in the Frozen North, turns out one of the Chaos Gods controls the weather, because look at that. 2 wins for Chaos Demons. 2 wins? That doesn't sound too impressive. There's only 2 players. Both of them won. Absolutely smashing it. So they're doing really well. Undeniably the best faction in the game with the small sample size of 2 games. They beat Ogres and Orcs. So if you play Demons, you can beat any faction that begins with an O, which is only 2 of the factions. But if you've got those 2, looking good there. And again, really nicely scoring. One of the players, Devers, I believe it's pronounced, is one of the top 3 scoring players there as well. Demon smash, basically. Then, counterpart to that, we've got the Dwarves, and Dwarves had an absolute disaster of a week. So Dwarves came into last week with a positive win rate. I think they'd won something like 4 out of their 7 games, which is not too shabby. This week, they got 1 win, so looking real grim for our Short King brethren. It's unfortunate. Hard to say why that is, whether it's that they've, the only one that they beat was Beastman, which was a 0% win rate, so maybe they just had some bad matchups. But be interesting to see how the Dwarves do throughout the event. Maybe Dwarf players need to turtle up a little bit more. It's really boring, but it's a good way to play with Dwarves. Speaking of Dwarves and artillery, typically linked, we've got the Empire, and the Empire had the exact opposite week. They went real hard. 9 players, 8 of them won their games, and the wins, they were pretty much smashing it. Turns out if you bring a gun line and you shoot your opponent to death, you're going to score pretty good. So Empire, sitting pretty there. If you picked Empire for the SBOT, you should be feeling pretty good about your life choices, I think, right now. Speaking of feeling pretty good about life choices, High Elves have a beautiful sunny day, continuing on, not quite as good as last week where they were completely undefeated, but they've gained another High Elf player, and this time round they have got 3 wins, a draw and a loss, so still looking pretty solid, 60% win rate, absolutely smashing one of the players. So interestingly with this, they had pretty middling scores, sort of 12s, 8s, and then one player got an 18 win. I don't know how that possibly could have happened. I definitely wasn't the person who got smashed by him. Moving on, we've got Lizardman. Speaking of getting smashed, Lizardman were doing pretty all right. Again, small sample size. There was only 3 Lizardman armies in the tournament. Last week, they were 2-1. This week, they're 1-1-1. So, hard to say, really. If you wanted me to make some hot takes, looking at the data, the winner had Croxigors, Bastillodons, and Ripidactyls. So, go out immediately and buy those, because the small sample size of 3 games means that those are the OP units for Lizardman. Then we have got the Tomb Kings, and Tomb Kings had a real tough start last time. They didn't get a single win with Mortuary Cult, which is quite surprising because Mortuary Cult's real good. This time round, they had a much better showing, 50% win rate overall across the 10 players, and Mortuary Cult, across the 5 Mortuary Cult players, went 3-2, so looking a lot better there. Maybe just a little bit of a stumble, getting used to online play, something along those lines. Speaking of a little stumble, though, this week, Orcs and Goblins ain't looking so good. If you remember from last week, Orcs and Goblins were smashing it. Army of Infamy aside, they had, I think, a single loss between them. They were almost entirely undefeated. This time round, Nomadic War has got its first win. Troll Horde still without a win. Sorry. But the Grand Army this time struggling a little bit more, so only 4 wins across the 12 players here. But overall, still looking sat around the 50% win rate, so nothing to be concerned about for those Orcs and Goblin players. Speaking of things you should be concerned of, though, Ogres, it is stormy up in them hills. This week, again, only 3 players, but not a single win. Maybe some rough matchups here. They were playing into Warriors of Chaos, Empire, and Demons. Obviously, as we all know, Demons of Chaos are the number 1 faction of the game. We've just proved it with the sample size of 2. Warriors of Chaos, typically seen as a pretty good army, and Empire are absolutely crushing it this week. So maybe it's just poor matchups here, and we'll see them bounce back. One to keep our eye on. Speaking of things that I'm keeping an eye on, though, SCAVEN, they got a win. They're on the board, baby. Whoop, 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 whoop. A huge fan of that. Obviously, I've been starting to dabble with SCAVEN. Going to take them to an event in August, whichever month comes next. But yeah, so 50-50. And the win they got was a proper respectable win. 19-1 victory. So big shout out there. I'm sorry, I forgot to write down whose name it was, but out of the 2 of you, whoever got a win, great stuff. Vampire counts, speaking of getting wins. So the Vampire counts, they are not smashing the games. They've got a lower win rate this week than last week. Last week, 5 of their 7 players won. This week, only 4. So, it's not a win rate that I'm super concerned about. But what is interesting is the 4 wins. That was 3 19s and a 20. Turns out, looks like if you get Screams in, and they're going to win, they win pretty big. The top 2 scoring players are in there, T Commander and Kata. So T Commander is the top scoring player at, I think, 39 out of 40 available points. And then Qatar is tied at 37, so big wins for Vampire counts. I think that's more a case of people maybe being inexperienced into playing into Screams. I think if you play cagey into it, it's very hard for them to get big wins, but we'll see. Maybe I'll be proved wrong by the end of the event. Speaking of being proved wrong, I thought Warriors going to just continue to roll through, but they've had a pretty rough week. Only 2 wins across their 7 players. Obviously, too far north. They've caught frostbite and are unable to move their models efficiently. They lost to Chaos Dwarves, High Elves, Bretonnians, and Tomb Kings. So a good spread of armies there. Again, maybe last week they got some really good matchups, and this week got some more difficult ones. Those are some pretty solid factions. Chaos Dwarves maybe not as represented as you might see in physicality, but definitely a good army. High Elves looking good. Bretonnians are solid. Tomb Kings are looking really good. So maybe just a blip on the radar. And speaking of blips on the radar, last week the Wood Elves, they only had 2 wins last week across 7 players. Well, this week they've gained a player, and they've gained loads of wins. They have 50-50 on the wins, 4 out of 8. They got a draw as well. And Denarius also up there, tied for 4th highest scoring, I believe. So there is at least one Wood Elf player who is absolutely crushing it. I was going to say, hopefully I don't play him. With my win rate so far, there's no risk of it. But yeah, so some interesting results there for the Elves specifically. I thought that Wood Elves would be above High Elves, but still time for that to even out. As you can see here, it's a much more polarized spread. Last week there was a lot more sort of orange and green, I'd say, where you've got those sort of more mid-range results. But here we've got some real stinkers. Warriors, Beastman, Ogres, and Dwarves having a really rough week. Lizardman, Orcs, and Goblins not having a great week, but then some real standouts in Chaos Demons, Empire. High Elves looking really good. I'd say Vampire counts look really good as well. Looking solid, yeah. Chaos Dwarves, great week. It'll be interesting to see how the win rates sort of even out over the course of the event. This isn't really representative data of sort of how armies are doing overall, I'd say, but it is interesting to see how they're doing in this specific event. It's a little microcosm. We've got some locked lists, so there's no adaptation. All you can do is learn to play better against different factions. So it'll be quite interesting to see how factions do against each other when we've got a little bit more data to go from. Maybe something to look at coming into sort of weeks 5 or 6. But thank you for joining me. That has been the update on the fictional weather of a fictional place, but a real tournament. I'll catch you next week. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, there's a link to subscribe over here. I really appreciate the support I've received over the last few months, and I'm looking forward to improving the channel and bringing you more content as the months go on. Down below are all the links. There's the Element affiliate link, all of our links to Discord, the 40k sister channel, everything else that we're doing down below. And on this side, there's another video. You don't have to click it, but you could. You could click it.